Hey everybody, and welcome to a new kind of tutorial. I wanted to go ahead and edit a student paper, and I thought I would go ahead and edit my own writing back from 2007 when I was an undergraduate in experimental psychology. So let's go through each section. So we're going to start with the title page, and don't forget to turn on track changes. And so I'm just going to be walking through some of the stuff that I made changes on throughout this document. It's not a very long document, and some of the changes will seem a little bit abrupt with respect to the editing. I increase the timing of the video here, and I'm just kind of doing a voiceover narration for work that I screen recorded. So here on the title page, I wanted to mention that in APA 7th edition, which is the version I'm using to write everything here, you do not need running heads anymore. That's the last vestige of a typewriter era that is 100% gone. And you can see there that it's not even in the header, which is important to note. Anyways, 7th edition, you can get rid of that. And so the other things that I'm adding here in track changes have to do with student paper title pages. So those are the pieces that you need for that. Now let's move on to the abstract. So this abstract is 118 words, and generally speaking, abstracts run from 150 to 250 words. I generally like to sit around 150 words. It's a nice target. One of the things you'll notice here that is that I bolded the heading in APA 7th edition. All major headings are bolded. The other thing that I wanted to note here, as you can see what I'm writing, is that the abstract is a summary. And generally speaking, it should be written last. Once you have all of the pieces of the main body of text written, you'll want to just write the summary. And it's about 1 to 2 sentences. You know, if you're making a target of 150 words, about one to two sentences per section. So introduction, method, results, and discussion, in a concluding sentence, if possible. And one thing you'll note in my writing here from 13 years ago is that I just jump right into a sentence about the present study. You really should set up the introduction a little bit better. You should give people a little bit more information as to what you plan to do for the however many pages the rest of the paper goes on for. And so I'm just making some edits here. I decided that these edits were not necessarily going to be a good idea for the remainder of the paper. So this is really the only section of the tutorial / voiceover that I will really go into detail about making like structural and sentence edits. Most of the remaining parts of this video are on leaving comments and not making giant deletions. I realized very quickly that I probably should not try to rewrite this paper from 13 years ago, considering that this was actually the first foray into a design and study that was ultimately replicated. Effects were seen, observed, and we were able to get this published in the Psychi Journal. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to go ahead and link in the description below where you can find that. I'll just link the DOI link to everyone so you can see it. But paying more attention here to the remainder of the abstract, you kind of want to grab your readers' attention. You want to give them all of the crucial bits of details that you expect them to read in more detail in the body of the paper. So I made some changes here. Some changes I actually don't say, or I don't highlight it again to see how many words I either added or subtracted. I believe it's shorter, so it's not a big deal. The last thing I'll note about this is that you could add keywords if you want. Keywords are fine to add for a student paper, not necessary. The other thing that I want to add is make sure you're using page breaks. So between the title page, abstract, and the start of the body, you'll want to use page breaks. So let's move on to the introduction, okay? Now, a couple of things have changed in the 7th edition. This was written on the 5th edition, which you'll see number of issues in a little bit. But one of the things that we didn't do is bold headings. They were just centered. Now, the idea for student papers is the introduction should be the title of the paper and bolded, just like it was on the title page. So you essentially just copy that over, centered, bolded. There you go. Now, the other thing that I'll point out in my writing was I was a very, very cut to the chase kind of guy when I was writing this as an undergraduate. I just jumped right into what the study was. And the comment that I make here is that you should actually start with a broader problem or research question. The first paragraph should be really should be a broad introduction. And Daryl Bem, the psychologist and really good writer, notes in his hourglass metaphor that this is one of the broadest parts of the paper, is that first paragraph. So I note here that you should really try to just give the reader a broad sense of where you're coming from. And then each subsequent paragraph should be a sort of focus down into your current paper. Okay. One of the other things that I note early in this part of the editing process is one maybe controversial change, at least for authors, I suppose. Always the third author, I suppose, is that the way that I have the references, the in-text citations in this first paragraph used to be the case. Now it is no longer. So I'll actually come back and make this change. I realized that, I should probably just go and make that change. Probably a good idea to make that change, to be honest with you. So I decided to go back and make the edits to where pretty much it's first author et al. Date, right? The other thing that I note here in the writing is that I think it's a good idea to use active voice wherever possible. Active voice is a very good idea because passive voice is boring. And it gets quite repetitive because passive voice relies on the verb to be. And when you rely on the verb to be, you end up repeating the same verbs over and over and over again. Was, is, were, are, etc. And pretty much it becomes was and were, because we're talking about past tense here. And so it's this was, they were, this was, they were. So that's one of the things that I'm mark here, is that perhaps it's a good idea to reword many of your sentences into active voice. Now, not everything's going to be able to be active voice. So passive voice is required some places, because active voice requires an actor that can actually do the action. You can see here that I have a note about the fact that studies can't do the things that I wrote that they could do. Okay. And so I suggest an edit where the findings observed, or so on and so forth. So just remember that you should not have your non-animate objects doing things that they can't do, doing animate actions. And you can see here I'm going back to change all of the multiple author papers to the first author, last name, and then et al., period, date. Okay. And you can see, and I don't need to make this change in the second paragraph, because it used to be that, between 3 and 6 authors, first time you mentioned them, you had to write all of them, and then every subsequent one you use the et al. After that. Now it's just et al. Every time for 3 or more authors. So yeah, I go back and make that change, but I don't have to make the change anywhere else. As you can see here, I am talking about the use of the word hedonic or hedonic, depending on how you want to pronounce it, where it just sort of pops out of nowhere. One thing I'll note about this is that what I notice in a lot of students' writing is that when they go back and forth between various sources are using various levels of academic writing. It all depends on the authors, of course. Not everything's going to be 100% equal or equivalent across the board. So you'll end up, like I did, looking at, potentially this Kampov Polvoy paper, and they use hedonic in their writing. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just use hedonic. However, I don't use it anywhere earlier. It just appears. And so the idea is to remove as much jargon as possible, parallel construction, and using words throughout that are essentially the right words, the repeated words. It's fine if you say pleasant over and over again. I mean, in the same sentence, it gets a little monotonous, but if you're being consistent, then I think that works. Okay. In these last couple of paragraphs, I mention make an edit where I move standardized system to earlier to make it clearer. Remember, you want your writing to be as clear as possible. And then I differentiate how the IAPS images are depicted, and what wide variety of occurrences in the environment means, and then identifying that the self-assessment mannequin is another piece to this puzzle, not necessarily connected to the IAPS, but standardized with the IAPS. So making that clear in the writing there. And then in this final paragraph, I mention that studies cannot hypothesize. So another way to write that is pretty important. And then I do have an issue with my previous use that I would not let fly these days as an instructor of experimental psychology, the idea of what a spicy/hot taste is, because again, that's just a term that just came out of nowhere. There's no discussion about spicy/hot. What is spicy/hot? Yeah, it's a complex flavor that is unlike basic taste qualities like sweet and sour. And so if I'm bringing it up at the very end, there's no background for it. So why have I discussed it? And this brings me to my last comment that I'm writing now at the end of the introduction. I usually just highlight the last word and write an overall comment. You can see that it's a good start, but I think that it requires quite a bit more depth. So if I were to rate my old writing of the introduction, I would say that it needs quite a bit more work on a future draft. Even though this was a final paper, it definitely needs more work on a future draft. Now, moving into the method section, we're picking up right away. You can see that with my advancement of the frames per second, I've gone in, done one quick thing sort of quickly, which is that I've bolded all of the headings and subheadings. And you can see here that method is bolded and centered, but the subheadings of participants, design and materials, and procedure, which are all available on this, which are all available at least in this frame right now, are all left, justified, flush left to the margin, and bolded. And here is where I am focusing on the participants. So I spend a little bit of time on the participants. So I give a little number rule, and I give the where to find it in the 7th edition of the APA manual. But one of the things that I will say is that it's a good idea to make the participant section as comprehensive as possible. And the idea here is more or less making sure that the sample was good and useful, but also for generalizable or generalizability or external validity reasons. You want to go ahead and make sure that if this were attempted to be replicated, that you would have the information about the sample as much as necessary, as much as you can. And so you can see here that me and my group did not do a very good job of getting that information. You can see age and gender vary, but we're not recorded. We should have done that. At the very least, we should have asked people what their age and gender were. And then I add at the end of this that you'll see in a second, it's a good idea to, regardless of what the sample size actually was, which is obviously always useful, is you should indicate the rationale or the justification for a particular sample size, whether it's one that you got or one that you are looking for. So this was proposal versus past tense, right? And it'll let you... The idea is that you only get the sample that would need to detect an effect. So the smallest sample size. So you can see here 52. We had 52 people. I have no idea what the smallest effect size was for our particular one-way IV design. So it's entirely possible that 52 was fine. We ended up with around 17 people per group. So yeah. If I were to go back and say, hey, you need a little bit more than this, of course, this was 13 some years ago, so it's entirely possible that these ideas were foreign to me, especially power analysis, definitely foreign. Now, moving on to design and materials, some of the things that I note about my own writing here is that you should put the design first. Design goes first, and then you fill in the pieces of the design in subsequent sentences. So I say here that it would be a good idea to say that this is a between subjects, simple, one independent variable designer. So then you can identify what the independent variable was and what the levels of that independent variable were. So you can identify here that the taste qualities were part of the materials, which is why this section was combined. Now, they're combined, they're not combined. It really depends on who you're talking to and what their convention is. I think the idea that you would combine them is to make this part of the section a little bit more concise. So an idea that I had for this, but I didn't really write it down in one of the comments because I thought about it after I screen recorded the editing, was that when you describe the independent variable and the levels of the IV, that's when you indicate what the taste quality is. So instead of just a series of taste qualities, you say, okay, well, so this was a sweet taste quality. We used Mike and Ike cherry spray, and then there was a spicy hot, and then we used hot tamale cinnamon spray, which, by the way, is awful. Oh, Jesus, it's so bad. It is so bad. And then for sour taste quality, you would say Warhead green apple. And then the other thing that I note here is that there's a bit of confusion regarding the IAPS and the SAM. So the IAPS is a set of pictures that we found for this, and I believe they were landscapes with objects in the landscapes. I don't remember, don't quote me on that. So the idea was that they would look at the images while spraying the spray, which you'll see in the procedure on the next page, and rate the pleasantness and arousal that they feel about it. And they were supposed to rate the picture, not what the spray candy made them feel. So the cinnamon flavor that was burning their mouths in that particular group was supposed to produce a hatred for the landscapes that they were looking at. I believe. I think that's what it was. We ended up making some changes before rerunning this, of course, before we got the good take of this particular research design. And then so separating that stimuli from the dependent variables of arousal and pleasantness, which were measured on the SAM axis. And that is not connected in that particular section. It should be, but it's not. And so that is an important thing to note, is that yes, stimuli are used in various ways, and lots of times that stimuli is a manipulated variable, but you have to separate those stimuli from stimuli that represent the measurement, right? So the SAM, the self-assessment mannequin, was the DV, and I'm making that note here because because what I did was I just used the word stimulus, and what does that mean? In the actual paper, it means the spray, but stimulus has been used for visual cues, not the spray, in earlier parts of the paper. And so you want to make sure that you are using, again, consistent verbiage throughout, right? And then I offer my best suggestion for the procedure, which typically is a sequence of 3 steps, which is create a step-by-step list with numbers, then combine those numbers, so basically remove the numbers and put it into a paragraph, And then 3, smooth and massage the text so it doesn't seem like a numbered list that has no numbers. So a strong step-by-step narrative. All right, moving into the results discussion and references. And I combine these because this section's sort of the same length as the previous methods one. So here my results is not great. I would not have accepted this results if I was my student now, because one of the things that I recommend as just sort of a practice learning by doing approach is, even if you end up with quote unquote non-significant results like I did here, you still need to put the APA statistical expressions. So here I would have put the one-way ANOVA, F 2, 50 or 40 something. I don't really feel like doing math right now. Close parenthesis equals whatever F equaled at is probably less than 1. And comma P equals some value greater than 0.05. It's a good idea to do that, and a lot of journals these days are actually requesting that, even though it's a non-significant test. It's probably a decent idea to include that, and you can even include the effect size, which would be minuscule at that point. Just as I would say a further piece of information for replication. I also reworded the last part there to make the table direction a little bit clearer. Now moving on into the discussion. The discussion has the same issue as the introduction. I kind of just jump into whether or not something was supported. I also had to get rid of confirm from my confirm, and did not confirm, and support is redundant. It's just, and you don't want to use confirm because confirm is a naughty word in science we want to falsify. So there was no support for my alternative hypothesis that there would be a difference among the taste qualities in emotion or pleasantness ratings and arousal ratings. So I jump right into comparisons with other research, with previous research. And so the suggestion I have for myself is that, whoa. First off, start with your study, what the results mean in words, and discuss how then this is linked to theoretical or practical implications. So in the second paragraph, or even further paragraphs, you are going to talk about the implications. And so that's where you would then compare your results then to previous research. And so that's what I think I did not do well here, is I just sort of crammed everything into a single paragraph, and that's not great. There's a bunch of ideas in this paragraph, and a paragraph is only a single idea, of course. So the next thing that I mention, or I start commenting on here, is a word choice that I don't know what I was thinking. Confer specific taste qualities. This sentence was not well written, and I'm sure it was dinged on its final scoring. Of course, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I indicate here what a person would do about it, because I just jumped right into confounds, and limitations and confounds should be discussed in an appropriate place. Although a confound is a good idea to discuss earlier rather than just simple limitations. And so the confound that we had was that it's unclear whether or not the participant was instructed consistently to keep spraying the thing, and what happens when they stop spraying it, or when they stop spraying it, or when they decided or when they decided they were done, or they were habituated, or when their tongue decided, when their brain was like, all right, we're gonna stop firing these particular neurons from the tongue, so let's move on here. So it's entirely possible that there were more confounds than I had mentioned here. And so I would say explore those. Don't just drop it in my lap and say, this was a confound. Tell me why it's a confound. And that's what I would have wanted from myself 13 years ago. And then I also note that that if you want to get sweet as sweet and sour as sour, you really gotta just, make sure that you are only getting that molecule. So you want sucrose water for sweet, acidic, something acidic for sour, and then moving on, right? And then finally, I mentioned here that don't end with future research. I like that I ended with future research, at least an idea for future research, which I think we take into consideration in the second replication. But I also say just, have a sentence or two for a conclusion. Actually conclude the paper, right? And then here the only two things. So these references look great. I bold the heading, but these references look really great. All they need are DOI links, and they're perfect. Which is amazing. I didn't mention it in the title card, but I also had a table in here, and the table's a very good start. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and link you with a card to my video on how to make APA tables in Excel. I think it's a fantastic way to make really well done, even tables. And here in this comment, I mark where you can find the table and figure information in the 7th edition. It's chapter 7, and tables is the first half of the chapter, and figures is the second half of the chapter. There are lots of things that I would change with this table, but it is a very good start for a simple table such as this, my first go around. We don't have any figures in this one though, but I did say in the method section that the SAM DVs, the self-assessment mannequin, that would be really great for a figure. I believe we had the figure on our poster, but we did not include it in the paper because we linked the author and where they came from. So that's kind of what we did, right? So that is how to edit an APA paper. How to edit an APA paper. How to sort of, after the first draft, making these changes. What sort of changes are focused on in an APA paper? What is an APA paper all about? And so I want to thank you for watching this all the way through. And, don't forget to leave any feedback you have. Happy editing. Leave a comment, some feedback down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I really enjoy making these videos.